The dust-laden air of Larkspur Creek stung Constance Abernathy's eyes as she ran, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild mustang. Behind her, the echoes of Horace Willingham's drunken rage faded into the twilight, but the memory of his raised fist remained burned in her mind. June 1876 had brought nothing but misery since she'd married the wealthy landowner 6 months prior, a decision she regretted with every labored breath as she fled into the growing darkness. Constance stumbled over the rocky terrain, her once fine dress torn at the hem and smudged with the red earth of Wyoming territory. The setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape, and she knew she had precious little time before the light abandoned her completely. Her fingers brushed against the small leather pouch hanging from her neck, containing the only possessions she'd managed to grab: her mother's wedding ring and the meager savings she'd hidden from Horace over months of careful planning. She had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to put distance between herself and the man who had promised love but delivered only pain. The vast, open country stretched before her, beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. As darkness fell completely, Constance found herself following the sound of running water. A small creek cut through the landscape, and she knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink the cool liquid. Her reflection in the moonlit water showed a woman she barely recognized, hair disheveled, a bruise forming on her cheek, and eyes filled with a wild fear. "Steady there, miss," a deep voice called from the shadows. Constance sprang to her feet, nearly losing her balance as she backed away from the unseen speaker. Her hand instinctively reached for the small knife hidden in her boot, another secret she'd kept from Horace. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. A tall figure emerged from the tree line, leading a dappled gray horse. The moonlight revealed a man in dusty riding clothes, a wide-brimmed hat casting shadows across his face. He stopped several paces away, seemingly aware of her fear. "Name's Bryce Callahan," he said, keeping his distance. "Was making camp when I heard someone approaching. You look like you could use some help." "I need no man's help," Constance replied, though her trembling hands betrayed her. "I'm merely passing through." Bryce nodded slowly, then gestured to a small campfire flickering in a clearing nearby. "Well, passing through is mighty dangerous for a lone woman after dark. There's coffee by the fire if you've a mind to warm yourself before continuing your travels." Constance hesitated, weighing her options. The night was growing colder and she had nowhere to go. This stranger could be dangerous, but something in his calm demeanor suggested otherwise, and if he meant her harm, she'd face no worse fate than returning to Horace. "1 cup," she finally agreed. "Then I'll be on my way." Bryce led her to the modest camp, where a coffee pot sat nestled in the coals of a small fire. The flames illuminated his features properly, for the first time a weathered face that spoke of years under the sun, piercing blue eyes, and a neatly trimmed beard speckled with gray, despite him appearing to be only in his 30s. "You're running from something," he observed, pouring coffee into a tin cup. It wasn't a question. Constance accepted the cup but remained standing, poised for flight. "What makes you say that?" "Folks who are just passing through generally bring more than the clothes on their back," he replied, nodding toward her torn dress. "And they don't usually have marks like that." His eyes flickered to the bruise on her cheek. Shame and anger flared within her. "My circumstances are my own concern, Mr. Callahan." "Fair enough," he conceded, settling onto his bedroll across the fire. "But whoever gave you that bruise will likely come looking. Might be wise to have a plan beyond running blind into open country." The truth of his words struck Constance hard. She had no plan, nowhere to go. Horace's influence extended throughout the county. Everyone knew him as a respected businessman and rancher. No one would believe his refined, charitable public persona concealed a monster. "There's a town called Silverpine about 2 days' ride west of here," Bryce continued, seemingly unbothered by her silence. Small place, but far enough from anywhere that folks mind their business. I'm headed there myself, delivering horses to the livery. Constance's eyes darted to the horses grazing nearby, 5 of them, in addition to Bryce's gray. Each bore the mark of quality breeding. "You're a horse trader?" she asked. Bryce nodded. "Among other things, spent most of my life in the saddle, working ranches from Texas to Montana. Found I had a way with difficult horses, so now I buy, train, and sell them." He studied her over the rim of his cup. "If you're looking to disappear, I could use an extra hand with the string. Pay isn't much, but it'll get you to Silverpine without questions." Constance considered his offer. Traveling alone was dangerous, especially with Horace's men potentially searching for her. But trusting this stranger carried its own risks. "Why would you help me?" she asked bluntly. Bryce's expression darkened momentarily. "Let's just say I've seen what angry men do to those weaker than themselves. Never sat right with me." He set his cup down. "You can ride with me to Silverpine or continue on your own. Either way, you're welcome to share the camp tonight." Constance weighed her options carefully. The practical choice was clear, yet pride and caution warred within her. Finally, exhaustion made the decision. "I'll ride with you to Silverpine," she said, "but I won't be beholden to any man again." "Fair terms," Bryce replied with a slight nod. "We'll leave at first light." That night, Constance slept fitfully, wrapped in a blanket Bryce had offered, her back against a tree and her knife close at hand. She woke frequently, startled by every sound, half expecting to see Horace's men emerging from the darkness. Each time she found Bryce sitting by the fire, whittling a piece of wood or simply staring into the flames, a silent guardian. Dawn broke with a symphony of birdsong and the soft nickering of horses. Constance rose stiffly, her body aching from the unaccustomed exertion of yesterday's flight. Bryce was already packing his meager supplies, working with the efficiency of a man accustomed to life on the trail. "There's coffee left," he said without looking up. "And some jerky in the saddlebag if you're hungry." Constance murmured her thanks and poured the last of the coffee. As she sipped the bitter liquid, she took stock of her situation. Her dress was inappropriate for riding and she had no suitable alternatives. As if reading her thoughts, Bryce approached with a bundle of cloth. "These might help," he said, offering what appeared to be a worn shirt and trousers. "They'll be too big, but better than riding in that dress." Constance accepted the clothes with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "Thank you, I'll find somewhere to change." A hint of amusement flickered in Bryce's eyes. "I'll tend to the horses, take your time." Behind the privacy of a large juniper, Constance changed quickly. The men's clothing felt strange against her skin, but the practicality was undeniable. She used a length of rope as a belt to cinch the trousers and rolled up the sleeves of the shirt. Her dress she bundled tightly. It was ruined for propriety's sake, but the fabric might prove useful later. When she emerged, Bryce gave her an appraising look. "Might want this too," he said, offering a faded bandana. "Keep the sun off your neck." As she tied the bandana, Constance caught her reflection in a small pool of water. With her hair tucked under the fabric and dressed in men's clothing, she looked nothing like the proper wife of Horace Willingham. For the first time since fleeing, a glimmer of hope sparked within her. Bryce showed her how to saddle one of the calmer mares, a chestnut with a white blaze. "This is Maple," he explained, stroking the horse's neck. "She's steady and sure-footed, won't give you any trouble." "I can ride," Constance assured him, though it had been years since she'd been allowed to do so. Horace believed horseback riding unladylike and had forbidden it shortly after their marriage. They set off as the sun climbed above the eastern horizon, Bryce leading the way with 2 horses on lead ropes while Constance rode Maple and managed 1 other horse. The remaining 2 followed obediently, trained to stay with the herd. As they rode, Constance found herself studying her companion. Bryce sat easy in the saddle, his movements in perfect harmony with his mount. He spoke little, but his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert to any sign of danger or opportunity. By midday, the Wyoming sun beat down mercilessly. They stopped in the shade of a rocky outcropping to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. "How long have you been married?" Bryce asked abruptly, breaking the companionable silence. Constance stiffened. "What makes you think I'm married?" He nodded toward her left hand, where a pale band of skin marked the absence of a wedding ring. She'd removed Horace's ring the moment she fled, burying it in the garden behind their house. 6 months, she admitted reluctantly, though it feels like a lifetime. Bryce didn't press for details, simply nodding as if her answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. "What about you?" Constance asked, partly to deflect attention from herself. "Is there a Mrs. Callahan waiting somewhere?" A shadow passed across his face. "There was once. Elizabeth died of fever 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," Constance said, feeling a genuine pang of sympathy. Bryce shrugged, but the casual gesture didn't mask the pain in his eyes. "Life out here is hard on women, harder than it is on men, I think." They continued their journey as the afternoon waned, following a trail that only Bryce seemed to see. Constance's muscles protested the unaccustomed activity, but she refused to complain. This discomfort was a small price for freedom. As evening approached, they made camp near a small stand of cottonwoods. Bryce efficiently set about building a fire while Constance unsaddled the horses, determined to pull her weight. When he returned from hunting with 2 rabbits, she surprised him by taking them and preparing them for cooking with practiced skill. "You've done that before," he observed as she skinned the animals with quick, precise movements. "My father was a trapper before he settled down to farm," Constance explained. "He taught me to hunt and prepare game before I was 10, said every person should know how to feed themselves." She smiled faintly at the memory. "My mother was scandalized, but she never stopped him." "Your father sounds like a sensible man." "He was," she agreed, her smile fading. "He and my mother died of influenza 3 winters ago after that." She trailed off, unwilling to explain how Horace had swooped in, presenting himself as her savior when the farm was seized for debt. They ate in companionable silence as darkness enveloped the land. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional whicker from the horses. It was peaceful in a way Constance had almost forgotten could exist. "What will you do in Silverpine?" Bryce asked as they finished their meal. Constance stared into the flames. "Find work, I suppose. I can cook, clean, so whatever's needed." She hesitated. "Do you think anyone there would hire a woman without references? Silverpine isn't like the more established towns. People there are focused on building new lives, not questioning others about their past." He paused, considering. "The hotel might need help. Owner's a widow named Maddie Fletcher. Fair woman, pays decent wages." Hope fluttered in Constance's chest. "You know her well." "Well enough to put in a word if you'd like." The offer touched her, though caution tempered her gratitude. "Why are you being so kind to me? You know nothing about me." Bryce's expression grew distant, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "When Elizabeth died, I was in a dark place. Would have drunk myself to death if not for strangers who showed me kindness when I didn't deserve it." He met her gaze steadily. "Sometimes all a person needs is a chance to start over." Constance felt something shift between them, not romance, but a deeper understanding. In Bryce Callahan, she recognized a kindred spirit who understood loss and the desperate need for redemption. "Thank you," she said simply. They set watches for the night, with Bryce taking the first shift. Constance slept more soundly than she had in months, lulled by the rhythmic breathing of the horses and the knowledge that someone trustworthy stood guard. The second day of travel brought them through increasingly rugged terrain. Constance's body ached from the unaccustomed riding, but she found a certain pleasure in the physical discomfort. It was honest pain, earned through effort rather than inflicted by cruelty. As they traversed a narrow pass between 2 hills, Bryce suddenly raised his hand, signaling for silence. His posture had changed, alert and tense like a predator sensing danger. "What is it?" Constance whispered, her heart accelerating. "Riders," he murmured, nodding toward a dust cloud visible in the distance behind them. 3, maybe 4, fear clutched at Constance's throat. Horace, she gasped. He must have sent men after me. Bryce's expression hardened. We can't outrun them with all these horses, not across open country. He scanned the landscape, then pointed to a dense thicket of trees and brush that clung to the hillside. There. We can hide the horses in that draw and wait for them to pass. They urged their mounts toward the concealment, leading the string of horses into the natural shelter. Bryce worked quickly, using branches to brush away their tracks where they left the trail. Within minutes, they were hidden from view, the horses secured and quieted by Bryce's calming presence. Stay with the horses, he instructed, checking the revolver at his hip. I'm going to get a better look at our visitors. Constance gripped his arm. Be careful. Horace's men won't hesitate to shoot. Something flickered in Bryce's eyes, concern, perhaps, or determination. He nodded once and slipped away, moving with the silent grace of a man accustomed to stalking prey. Alone with the horses, Constance fought to control her breathing. The thought of being dragged back to Horace filled her with cold dread. She would rather die here in this wilderness than return to that elegant prison, and the man whose charm concealed such cruelty. Time stretched endlessly until Bryce returned, his expression grim. 4 riders, he confirmed in a low voice. Well armed. One of them matches the description of your husband, older man, expensive clothes, riding a black stallion. Constance nodded, her mouth dry with fear. That's him. The others will be his foreman and ranch hands. She clutched Bryce's sleeve. What do we do? Bryce's jaw tightened as he considered their options. They're following our trail, but they're not trackers by trade. They've passed us now, heading west. He hesitated. If we turn north, we can lose them in the foothills, then circle back towards Silverpine from a different direction. Will that work? It means rougher terrain and an extra day of travel, he admitted. But yes, it should work. They waited another hour to ensure Horace and his men were well ahead before emerging from their hiding place. Bryce led them on a perpendicular course away from their original trail, taking care to leave minimal signs of their passage. As they rode, Constance found herself watching Bryce with new appreciation. He handled the crisis with calm competence, never once suggesting she was a burden or that her problems were not his concern. Where did you learn to track and hide signs like that? She asked as they climbed a rocky slope that would leave little trace of their passing. A shadow crossed Bryce's face. Spent 2 years scouting for the army after the war, learned from a Pawnee tracker named Walking Bear. His voice carried a weight that suggested the experience had left its mark. Not proud of all I did in those days, but the skills have proven useful. By nightfall, they had reached the foothills, where pine forests provided better concealment. They made a cold camp, unwilling to risk a fire that might be spotted from a distance. Huddled in her blanket, Constance couldn't stop shivering as much from delayed fear as from the mountain chill. He won't stop looking, she whispered, voicing the fear that had plagued her all day. Horace can't stand to lose anything he considers his property. Bryce handed her a small flask. Whiskey, he explained, just a sip to warm you. She took a careful swallow, gasping as the liquor burned a path down her throat. As warmth spread through her chest, she found the courage to continue. I thought he was different when we met, she admitted. After my parents died, the bank took our farm. I was alone with nowhere to go. Horace was charming, attentive. He seemed like salvation. She laughed bitterly. By the time I saw his true nature, it was too late. I was already his wife, his possession. When did he first hit you? Bryce asked quietly. 3 weeks after the wedding. I spoke to a male guest at dinner without being addressed first. Her fingers unconsciously touched her cheek. He apologized afterward, blamed it on too much wine, said it would never happen again. But it did, she nodded. Each time worse than before, each time with a new promise that it was the last. She drew a shaky breath. 2 nights ago, he came home drunk, angry about a business deal gone wrong. I knew from his eyes that this time he might not stop. Bryce's face hardened in the moonlight. No man has the right to treat a woman that way. no matter what the law says about a husband's authority. His conviction warmed something in Constance that had grown cold during her marriage. I kept thinking I could change him, or that I'd done something to deserve it. She shook her head at her own naivety. Now I just want to be far away, somewhere he can never find me. You will be, Bryce promised, his voice low and certain. Silverpine is just the beginning. If necessary, there are places further west where a person can truly disappear. Constance studied him in the dim light. You speak as if you've done it yourself. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Let's just say I understand the appeal of a fresh start. They sat in companionable silence until exhaustion overcame anxiety and Constance drifted into restless sleep. The next morning brought drizzling rain that further obscured their trail. They traveled through increasingly dense forest, following game paths and stream beds that would confuse any pursuit. Constance's admiration for Bryce's woodcraft grew as she watched him read the landscape, finding passages that seemed invisible until he pointed them out. By afternoon, the rain had stopped, and Bryce declared it safe to circle back toward their original destination. They emerged from the foothills to see rolling grasslands stretching toward distant mountains, the vastness of the landscape both humbling and exhilarating. There, Bryce said, pointing to a thin column of smoke rising from a valley perhaps 10 miles distant. Silverpine. Constance felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief, anticipation, and an unexpected tinge of sadness. In just 3 days, she had grown accustomed to Bryce's quiet company and the simple rhythms of life on the trail. Will you stay there long? She asked, trying to sound merely curious. Bryce adjusted his hat against the glare of the emerging sun. A few days. Need to conclude my business at the livery resupply, maybe look for new stock. He glanced at her. Long enough to make sure you're settled. The concern in his voice touched her. I've been enough trouble already. No trouble, he said simply. Besides, I promised to introduce you to Maddie Fletcher. They made camp early that evening, both tacitly acknowledging it would be their last night before reaching civilization. Bryce actually smiled when Constance surprised him by catching a brace of trout from a nearby stream, using a line and hook she'd fashioned from items in his saddlebag. My father believed in practical education, she explained, cleaning the fish with deft movements. Said books were fine, but knowing how to feed yourself was better. Wise man, Bryce commented, preparing the fire. Most women I've known wouldn't know which end of a fishing line to hold. Most women haven't had the chance to learn, Constance countered. It's not lack of ability but lack of opportunity that limits us. Bryce considered this as he arranged the fish over the flames. Elizabeth used to say something similar. She was a doctor's daughter, educated beyond most men I knew. Always frustrated that her knowledge was considered inappropriate for a woman. She sounds remarkable, Constance said gently. She was. His voice softened with memory. Too remarkable for the life I gave her, I think. Small ranch in harsh country, no neighbors for miles. He prodded the fire. She never complained, but I saw how it wore on her. By the time I realized she needed more than I was providing, it was too late. The raw honesty in his confession moved Constance. You can't blame yourself for her illness. Maybe not for the fever, but for her isolation. For ignoring what she needed because I was too caught up in my own vision of our life. He shook his head. A man bears responsibility for the suffering he causes, whether by action or inaction. His words hung in the air between them, illuminating the vast difference between Bryce and Horace. One man accepted responsibility for pain he hadn't intended. The other refused to acknowledge the harm he deliberately inflicted. They ate their fish in contemplative silence as darkness settled around them. The night was clear, stars emerging like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Constance found herself memorizing everything about this moment: the scent of pine and wood smoke, the soft sounds of horses shifting in their sleep, the silhouette of Bryce against the firelight. What will you do after Silverpine? She asked, breaking the silence. Bryce stared into the flames. Head north, maybe. There's a ranch in Montana Territory that breeds good stock. Thought I might see if they have horses worth investing in. Sounds lonely, she observed. It can be, he admitted, but I've grown accustomed to my own company. Is that what you want, to be alone? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked up, meeting her gaze across the fire. Wasn't a matter of wanting, just seemed the natural course after Elizabeth. He hesitated. What about you? What do you want now that you're free? Constance considered the question seriously. Safety first, then purpose. A life that's my own. She traced patterns in the dirt beside her. I've never had the luxury of dreaming beyond survival. Dreams have a way of finding you once you have room for them, Bryce said, his voice softening. You're stronger than you know, Constance. Whatever life you build in Silver Pine or beyond, I suspect it will be remarkable. His confidence in her warmed something deep inside that had been cold for too long. For the first time since fleeing Horace, Constance allowed herself to truly believe in the possibility of a future worth having. Morning brought a sense of anticipation as they broke camp for the last time. Silver Pine lay just a few hours' ride away, and with it, the true test of Constance's resolve to build a new life. As they rode, the landscape gradually showed more signs of human presence: fenced pastures, the occasional distant farmhouse, a well-traveled road that they finally joined about 5 miles from town. Best if we have a story prepared, Bryce suggested as they approached Silver Pine. People will ask questions about a woman arriving with a horse trader. Constance nodded. What do you suggest? Simplest is often best. You're my widowed cousin coming west after losing your husband, looking for a fresh start. He glanced at her. Close enough to the truth to be convincing. And if Horace comes looking, by then you'll have friends in town, people who'll stand by you. His jaw tightened. And I'll make sure Maddie knows enough to be wary of strangers asking after a new arrival. The outskirts of Silver Pine came into view, a scatter of homesteads gradually thickening into proper streets lined with wooden buildings. It wasn't large by Eastern standards, but to Constance, it represented both sanctuary and uncertainty. They rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from townspeople. Silver Pine had the bustling energy of a young settlement finding its footing. A mercantile, saloon, small church, hotel, and various other businesses lined the street, while construction continued on several new buildings. Bryce led them directly to a large stable at the edge of town. A wiry man with iron-gray hair emerged as they approached, his weathered face breaking into a grin. Callahan, beginning to think you'd forgotten the way to Silver Pine, he called, appraising the string of horses with an expert eye. Got delayed, Sam, Bryce replied, dismounting. This is my cousin Constance, recently widowed, looking for a fresh start. Sam touched his hat respectfully. Madam, sorry for your loss, Constance nodded, playing her part. Thank you, mister. Just Sam, madam, everyone calls me Sam. He turned back to Bryce. Brought some fine animals this time. That bay looks promising. As the men discussed horses, Constance took the opportunity to study Silver Pine more closely. The town had a raw, unfinished quality that she found oddly appealing, a place still defining itself, where perhaps she too could redefine who she was. After concluding his business with Sam, Bryce led Constance to a 2-story building with a freshly painted sign declaring it the Silver Pine Hotel and Dining Room. The interior was simple but clean, with a small lobby dominated by a wooden registration desk. A woman emerged from a back room, tall, sturdy, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and keen eyes that missed nothing. She broke into a wide smile when she saw Bryce. Well, look what the wind blew in, she said warmly. Bryce Callahan, it's been too long. Maddie, he greeted her with genuine affection. Place looks good, you've been busy. Town's growing, good for business. Her sharp eyes shifted to Constance, assessing but not unkind. And who might this be? My cousin Constance, Bryce explained, repeating their agreed-upon story. She's looking for work, somewhere to settle. Thought of you right away. Maddie's gaze softened as she took in Constance's appearance, the men's clothing, the tension in her posture, the fading bruise not quite hidden by her hair. "Cousin, is it?" she said, her tone making it clear she didn't believe the story but wouldn't challenge it. "Well, as it happens, I could use help with the rooms and dining area. Pays fair includes a room and meals." She paused. "Works hard, but no one raises their voice or their hand in my establishment." That clear relief washed over Constance. "Perfectly clear, Mrs. Fletcher, I'm not afraid of hard work." "Maddie, please, we don't stand on ceremony here." She nodded decisively. "You can start tomorrow. Bryce can bring your things by later." After securing a room for Constance and arrangements for himself at the livery's bunkhouse, Bryce escorted her back outside. They walked slowly down the boardwalk, both seemingly reluctant to part ways. "Maddie's good people," Bryce assured her. "Sharp as they come, but fair. She'll look out for you. You've known her long. Her husband gave me my first job when I came west. After he died, Maddie took over the ranch, ran it better than he ever did." He smiled slightly. "When Silverpine started growing, she saw an opportunity and sold the ranch to build this hotel. Woman has a head for business that most men would envy." They stopped at the edge of town, looking out over the rolling landscape they'd traversed together. The afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, lending a dreamlike quality to the moment. "I don't know how to thank you," Constance said quietly. "What you've done for me." "You'd have found your way without me," Bryce replied, though his eyes suggested he was pleased by her gratitude. "Perhaps, but the journey would have been much harder and far lonelier." She met his gaze directly. Will you stay in Silverpine long?" Something flickered in his expression, reluctance, perhaps, or uncertainty. "Few days at least. Need to rest the horses, pick up supplies." He hesitated. "But my business takes me on the trail. It's the life I know." Constance nodded, ignoring the unexpected pang of disappointment. "Of course. I understand." They parted with promises to meet for dinner at the hotel, each heading toward their respective accommodations to clean up after days on the trail. As Constance soaked in the luxury of her first proper bath since fleeing, she found her thoughts returning persistently to Bryce, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the shadows that sometimes darkened his eyes. In just 3 days, he had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate, but she reminded herself sternly that attachment was dangerous. Her priority had to be establishing independence, building a life that belonged solely to her. Whatever feelings might be developing for Bryce Callahan would only complicate that essential task. Dinner at the hotel's small dining room was a revelation. After months of cooking elaborate meals for Horace's business associates, sitting at a table as a guest felt strangely luxurious. Bryce, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, looked transformed from the trail-worn cowboy she'd come to know. Maddie joined them briefly, bringing an extra slice of apple pie and staying to share news of the town. Her sharp eyes missed nothing of the unspoken current between Constance and Bryce, but she kept her observations to herself. Over the next week, Constance threw herself into her new position at the hotel. The work was indeed demanding: cleaning rooms, serving meals, washing endless linens, but Maddie was a fair employer who recognized Constance's intelligence and efficiency. By the 4th day, she had promoted Constance to managing the dining room with responsibility for menus and supplies. Bryce remained in Silverpine longer than he'd initially planned. Each day brought some new reason to delay his departure, horses needing additional rest, supplies not yet arrived, business opportunities to explore. Each evening, he appeared at the hotel dining room, taking the same corner table and waiting for Constance to finish her duties so they could share conversation over coffee or a late supper. On her 8th day in Silverpine, Constance was arranging flowers in the dining room when the hotel door opened, admitting a tall man in an expensive suit. Something about his bearing caused her to look up, and cold fear washed over her as she recognized Jeremy Walsh, Horace's lawyer and closest business associate. She ducked into the kitchen, heart pounding. Through the serving hatch, she could see Walsh speaking with Maddie at the registration desk, his manner polite but insistent. Maddie's posture remained relaxed, but Constance recognized the subtle sharpening of her gaze that occurred when she was on alert. After Walsh departed, Maddie found Constance in the kitchen, white-faced and trembling. "Friend of your husband's, I take it?" Maddie asked without preamble. Constance nodded mutely, thought as much. "Looking for a woman matching your description, said she'd stolen valuable family heirlooms." Maddie's expression hardened. "I told him no such person had passed through Silverpine, but he's taking a room for the night, says he's waiting for business associates. He'll recognize me," Constance whispered, "and Horace won't be far behind." "Then we need to get you somewhere safe until we figure this out," Maddie considered briefly. "Go find Bryce. He's at the livery with Sam. I'll cover for you here." Constance slipped out the back way, using alleys and side streets to avoid being seen. At the livery, she found Bryce examining a lame horse while discussing treatment options with Sam. His expression changed instantly when he saw her face. "What's happened?" she explained rapidly, her voice low and urgent. Sam, listening, shook his head grimly. "Willingham has a reputation," the older man said. "Throws his weight around, uses the law when it suits him. If he's coming himself, we're talking serious trouble." Bryce's jaw tightened. "She can't stay in town, not now." "My sister has a place about 15 miles north," Sam offered. "Remote, hard to find if you don't know the way. She'd take you in while we sort this out." Bryce shook his head. "Too obvious. They'll check with everyone in town, find out about your sister eventually." He turned to Constance. "Do you trust me?" The question seemed unnecessary after everything they'd shared, but she nodded without hesitation. "I know a place," Bryce said. "Old line shack in the foothills where I've weathered storms before. No one would think to look there, and even if they did, you can see anyone approaching from miles away." "You'd have to leave immediately," Sam warned, "before this Walsh fellow starts asking too many questions around town." Constance felt the world narrowing to this single decision point. Staying meant risking capture and return to Horace. Leaving meant abandoning the fragile new life she'd begun to build. But one look at Bryce's resolute expression settled the matter. "How soon can we go?" Within the hour, they were riding away from Silverpine, following a game trail that wound into the forested foothills. Bryce led the way on his gray, while Constance rode Maple, the chestnut mare she'd come to consider her own. Maddie had hastily packed supplies, food, clothing, a few precious books, and promised to send word when it was safe to return. They rode in tense silence until Silverpine disappeared from view. Only then did Bryce slow their pace, allowing the horses to pick their way more carefully through the increasingly rugged terrain. "I'm sorry," Constance said finally. "I've upended your life again, forced you to flee with me." Bryce glanced back, his expression softening. "You didn't force anything, I made my choice. But your business, your plans. We'll wait." He guided his horse alongside hers so they rode abreast where the trail permitted. "Some things matter more than business, Constance." The simple statement warmed her despite the anxiety that still churned in her stomach. They continued through the afternoon, climbing steadily into the hills until the landscape transformed completely. Pine forests gave way to rocky slopes dotted with juniper and sage, and the air grew noticeably cooler. As evening approached, they crested a ridge to find a small valley spread before them. A stream meandered through meadows still green despite the advancing summer, and nestled against the far slope stood a small cabin, weathered gray by years of exposure. "It's not much," Bryce said, almost apologetically. "Cattlemen built it years ago as shelter during roundups. Abandoned now, but sound enough." The cabin proved better than Constance had expected. Though small and rustic, it was clean and relatively well-maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, opposite a small table with 2 chairs. A narrow bed occupied one corner, while shelves held basic supplies: coffee, flour, beans, and other staples in tightly sealed containers. "I stop by when I'm in the area," Bryce explained, seeing her surprise at the provisions. "Keep it stocked for emergencies. Never know when a storm might strand you in these hills." As Bryce tended to the horses, securing them in a small lean-to attached to the cabin, Constance busied herself making the place more livable. She swept the plank floor, dusted surfaces, and inventoried their supplies. By the time Bryce returned, she had coffee brewing on the small iron stove and was assembling a simple meal from their provisions. "Feels almost like home," he commented, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. The casual remark struck Constance with unexpected force. This tiny cabin, remote and primitive, already felt safer and more like home than the grand house she'd shared with Horace. The realization must have shown on her face, for Bryce's expression grew concerned. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she assured him, surprised to find it was true. "Just thinking how strange life is. A month ago, I was mistress of one of the finest houses in the county, with servants and fine things." She gestured around the cabin. "And now I'm hiding in a lined shack in the wilderness, and somehow I feel more at peace." Bryce studied her thoughtfully as he washed trail dust from his hands and face. Freedom has a way of putting luxury in perspective. They ate by lantern light, discussing practical matters: how long they might need to stay, arrangements for supplies, signals they could use if danger approached. Neither mentioned what would happen afterward, as if by unspoken agreement they would focus only on the immediate future. As night deepened, the awkward reality of their situation became impossible to ignore. The cabin contained only one bed, narrow but adequate for a single occupant. "I'll sleep by the fire," Bryce said firmly when Constance broached the subject. "Spent most of my life sleeping on the ground. A wooden floor with a blanket is luxury by comparison." Despite her protests, he was adamant, and Constance finally relented. She lay awake long after Bryce's breathing had deepened into sleep, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness: the mournful call of an owl, the rustling of night creatures, the soft sighing of wind through pine boughs. Despite the circumstances that had brought her here, she felt an unexpected contentment. Days in the lined shack fell into a simple rhythm. Bryce rose at dawn to check the horses and scout the surrounding area, while Constance prepared breakfast and tended to the cabin. Their days were filled with practical tasks: gathering firewood, hunting for fresh meat, repairing the cabin's minor deficiencies. In the evenings, they talked by firelight, sharing stories of their lives before they'd met. Constance learned that Bryce had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, had fought briefly for the Union during the war's final year, and had drifted west afterward, unable to settle back into civilian life. He spoke of working cattle drives in Texas, mining in Colorado, scouting for the Army in Indian Territory, a life of constant movement and occasional danger. In turn, she told him about her childhood on a hardscrabble farm in Pennsylvania, her mother's determination that she receive education despite their poverty, her father's lessons in self-reliance. She spoke of the dreams she'd once harbored of teaching, perhaps, or running a small business, of her own dreams that had withered under Horace's controlling influence. "You could still do those things," Bryce observed one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "You're young, educated, capable. Once this danger passes, there's nothing stopping you." "Except fear," she admitted. "I trusted my judgment once and it led me to Horace. I'm not sure I trust it anymore." "Seems to me your judgment brought you here," Bryce countered. "You had the courage to leave when many women would have stayed. You trusted me when you had every reason to be suspicious." "Those weren't mistakes, Constance." His faith in her was both comforting and unsettling. Over the past weeks, something had changed between them, a deepening connection that went beyond friendship but remained undefined. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her heart quicken, only to look away when she met his gaze. On their 10th day in the cabin, Bryce returned from his morning scout with news. "Riders in the valley below," he reported, his expression grave. "4 men heavily armed." "One matches your description of Horace." Cold fear washed over Constance. "How did they find us?" "They haven't, not yet. They're searching systematically, following game trails and old logging roads." He sat beside her at the small table. "But these hills are a maze of canyons and ridges. Could take them weeks to check every possible hiding place if they even bother." "Horace is nothing if not persistent," Constance said bitterly. "Especially when his pride is wounded." Bryce's jaw tightened. "Persistent or not, he won't find you." "I know these hills better than any town-bred searchers." He hesitated. "But we should be prepared to move if necessary. There's another shelter farther north, more remote than this one." That night, sleep eluded Constance entirely. Every sound from the darkness outside seemed magnified, every shifting shadow a potential threat. After hours of tossing restlessly, she rose and moved to the cabin's single window, staring out at the moonlit landscape. "Can't sleep." Bryce's voice came softly from his place by the banked fire. "I keep thinking about what happens if they find us," she admitted. "What Horace might do." Bryce sat up, his face grave in the dim light. "I won't let him take you back, Constance, not if that's not what you want. And if he brings the law, if he accuses me of theft, as he did in Silverpine, then we'll face it together." He rose and came to stand beside her at the window. "The law doesn't look kindly on men who beat their wives, Constance, no matter what they claim about a husband's rights. There are judges who would grant you divorce on grounds of cruelty." The proximity of him was both comforting and distracting. In the close confines of the cabin, she had become acutely aware of Bryce as a man, the breadth of his shoulders, the strength in his hands, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "I never thought of divorce," she confessed. "It seemed impossible." "Nothing's impossible out here," his voice softened. "The West gives people second chances, Constance, clean slates." She turned to face him, suddenly very aware of how close they stood. "Is that what you found? A second chance?" Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability replacing certainty. "I thought I wanted solitude after Elizabeth died, convinced myself I was better off alone." His eyes held hers. "Now I'm not so sure." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken possibility. Constance felt herself swaying slightly toward him, drawn by a force as inevitable as gravity. Bryce's hand rose, hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Constance," he murmured, her name almost a question. A sudden sound from outside, a hoarse nickering, broke the spell. Bryce stepped back, his expression shifting instantly to alertness as he moved to the door, gun drawn. "Stay here," he instructed, slipping outside into the darkness. Heart pounding from more than fear, Constance waited, straining to hear any sound of danger. Minutes passed before Bryce returned, his posture relaxed. "Just a deer startled the horses," he explained, returning his revolver to its holster. "Nothing to worry about." But something had changed between them, a threshold approached but not crossed. They returned to their separate sleeping places with murmured goodnights, but Constance lay awake long afterward, replaying the moment and wondering what might have happened if not for the interruption. Morning brought heavy clouds and the promise of rain. Bryce departed for his daily scout with a warning that he might be gone longer than usual, wanting to check a wider perimeter given yesterday's sighting. Constance busied herself with chores, trying not to watch the sky anxiously as dark clouds gathered over the mountains. By mid-afternoon, the storm broke with startling ferocity. Rain lashed the cabin in sheets driven by howling wind, while lightning split the sky and thunder shook the very ground. Constance paced anxiously, watching the trail for any sign of Bryce's return. When he finally appeared, he was drenched and shivering, his normally sure movements slowed by cold and exhaustion. Constance rushed to help him inside, her relief tempered by concern at his condition. "You're freezing," she scolded, helping him remove his sodden coat. What happened? Got caught on the ridge when the storm hit, he explained through chattering teeth. Lightning spooked my horse. Had to catch him, then pick my way back in the downpour. Constance's nursing instincts took over. She built up the fire, heated water, and prepared hot coffee laced with whiskey from his supplies. When she turned back from the stove, she found Bryce struggling with the buttons of his shirt, his fingers too numb to function properly. "Let me," she said, setting down the coffee and moving to help. The simple act of unbuttoning his shirt became unexpectedly intimate. Constance focused determinedly on the task, trying to ignore the warmth of his skin beneath the damp fabric, the steady beat of his heart under her fingertips. When the last button yielded, she stepped back abruptly. "You should change into dry clothes," she said, her voice not quite steady. "I'll fetch a blanket." As she turned away, Bryce caught her wrist, his touch gentle but arresting. "Constance." She met his gaze reluctantly, afraid of what she might see there or what he might see in hers. The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "Thank you," he said simply. "For caring." The words seemed to carry weight beyond their surface meaning. Constance nodded, unable to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much of her heart. The storm raged through the night, confining them to the cabin the following day as well. They passed the hours in companionable activities, Bryce whittling a piece of pine, while Constance mended clothing, but an undercurrent of awareness flowed between them, making even simple interactions charged with possibility. By evening, the rain had settled into a gentle patter against the roof, creating a cozy atmosphere inside the cabin. They shared a simple meal of rabbit stew and cornbread, talking easily about inconsequential matters until Constance gathered her courage to ask the question that had been haunting her. "What happens when this is over, when it's safe to leave here?" Bryce set down his coffee cup, his expression thoughtful. "What do you want to happen?" I asked first, she countered, needing to understand his intentions before revealing her own. He smiled slightly at her evasion. "Fair enough." He considered his words carefully. "Before I met you, my path seemed clear. Keep trading horses, moving from town to town, answering to no one." He met her gaze directly. "Now that path doesn't hold the same appeal," hope fluttered in Constance's chest. "Why not? Because it doesn't include you." The simple honesty of his statement took her breath away. "These weeks here, sharing this small space, this simple life, they've meant something to me, Constance, more than I expected." She felt tears prickling behind her eyes. "They've meant something to me too." Bryce reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I'm not asking for promises. You've only just escaped one man's control. The last thing you need is another man making claims." His thumb traced gentle circles on her wrist. "But when this is over, when you're truly free to choose your own path, I'd like the chance to walk it with you, if that's what you want." The tenderness in his voice undid her completely. Tears spilled over as years of suppressed emotion, fear, loneliness, and now this fragile, newborn hope overwhelmed her defenses. "I don't know what I want yet," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Except that I don't want to lose you." Bryce rose and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair. His hands cradled hers with exquisite gentleness, as if she were something infinitely precious. "Then we'll figure it out together," he promised. "One day at a time." Their first kiss was tentative, a question rather than a demand. When Constance responded, it deepened into something more powerful, not the desperate passion she had expected, but a tender affirmation, sweet with promise and respect. When they parted, Bryce rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since Silverpine," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" "Didn't want to rush you, didn't want you to think I expected anything in return for helping you." His hands framed her face. "Your freedom matters most, Constance. Whatever happens between us has to be your choice, freely made." His consideration, so different from Horace's entitled demands, touched her deeply. "I choose this," she whispered, drawing him back to her. Their second kiss held more heat, but Bryce maintained a careful restraint, letting her set the pace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, he pressed a final kiss to her forehead and moved away slightly, creating respectful distance. "We should get some rest," he suggested, his voice rough with emotion. "Tomorrow I need to ride to Silverpine, see if Maddie has news." Constance nodded, though reluctance warred with practicality. Whatever was beginning between them deserved time and care, especially given her recent escape from a disastrous marriage. That night, for the first time, Bryce abandoned his place by the fire and joined Constance in the narrow bed. They did nothing more than hold each other, his arm a protective band around her waist, her head tucked beneath his chin. But in that simple embrace, Constance found a sense of peace and belonging she had never experienced before. Morning arrived with clear skies and a newfound ease between them. They moved around the cabin in comfortable harmony, exchanging touches and glances that spoke of their evolving relationship. When Bryce prepared to leave for Silverpine, Constance walked with him to where his horse waited. "Be careful," she urged, straightening his collar in a gesture that felt surprisingly natural. "Horace might still have men in town. I'll stay out of sight, speak only to Maddie or Sam." He cupped her cheek in his palm. "I'll be back before dark. Keep the rifle handy just in case." The kiss he gave her before mounting held both promise and reassurance. Constance watched him ride away, struck by how much had changed in such a short time. The woman who had fled in terror from Horace's rage now stood confidently in the wilderness, no longer merely surviving but beginning to truly live. She spent the morning constructively, cleaning the cabin and preparing food for Bryce's return. By afternoon, restlessness drove her outside to gather wild berries that grew in abundance near the stream. The simple task soothed her, connecting her to memories of childhood harvests with her mother. So absorbed was she in her gathering that she failed to notice the approaching rider until he was nearly upon her. When a shadow fell across the berry patch, she looked up, expecting to see Bryce returned early. Instead, she found herself staring into Horace Willingham's cold gray eyes. "Well, well," he said, his cultured voice carrying the familiar undertone of menace. "My wayward wife playing at pioneer woman, how charming." Constance dropped her berry basket, instinctively backing away. Horace dismounted smoothly, blocking her path back to the cabin where the rifle waited. "How did you find me?" she demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Money loosens tongues, my dear, even in these primitive parts." His smile never reached his eyes. A stable boy in Silverpine proved quite informative about the horse trader and his cousin who fled so suddenly. Constance cursed silently. They had been careful but not careful enough. "What do you want, Horace?" She raised her chin defiantly, determined not to show fear. "What's mine, of course." He stepped closer, his expensive boots incongruous against the wild landscape. "Did you really think I would allow my wife to run off without consequences? The humiliation, the gossip." His expression hardened. "You've made quite a spectacle of us both." "I'm not going back with you," Constance stated firmly, though her heart raced. "Not ever." Horace's laugh held no humor. "You have no choice, my dear. You are my wife under law. Your place is at my side." His gaze swept contemptuously over her simple clothing. "Though I see you've developed a taste for squalor in my absence, perhaps you've even shared that primitive bed with your cowboy protector." Anger flared, overriding fear. "What I have or haven't done is no longer your concern." His face darkened with rage. "Everything you do is my concern," he snarled, the civilized veneer slipping. "Everything you are belongs to me." He lunged forward, grabbing her arm with bruising force. Constance reacted instinctively, driving her knee upward as her father had once taught her. The blow landed solidly, and Horace doubled over with a howl of pain. She darted past him, running for the cabin and the rifle, but Horace recovered quickly. He tackled her from behind, sending them both crashing to the ground. Pain exploded in her ribs as she landed hard, Horace's weight pinning her down. "You'll regret that," he hissed, his face contorted with fury as he flipped her onto her back. His hands closed around her throat. "I've tolerated your disobedience long enough." Constance clawed at his hands, fighting for breath as darkness began to edge her vision. In desperation, she reached blindly along the ground, her fingers closing around a rock. With the last of her strength, she smashed it against Horace's temple. He reeled backward, blood streaming from the wound. Constance scrambled away, gasping for air, but Horace lunged after her with a roar of rage. His fist connected with her jaw, sending her sprawling again. Through pain-blurred vision, she saw him looming over her, hand raised for another blow. Then suddenly he was gone, ripped away by a force she couldn't see. Bryce had appeared as if conjured by her desperate need, hurling Horace bodily away from her. The two men grappled violently, crashing through underbrush in a brutal contest of strength and will. Despite Horace's larger build, Bryce fought with the efficient precision of a man accustomed to danger. He delivered a series of punishing blows that drove Horace to his knees, then stepped back, drawing his revolver and leveling it at the older man's chest. "It's over, Willingham," Bryce said, his voice deadly calm. "You won't touch her again." Horace, blood streaming from his nose and mouth, glared with undiluted hatred. "She's my wife, Cowboy. The law is on my side." "The law doesn't permit wife beating," Bryce countered. "Not anywhere civilized." "Who'll believe her word against mine? A respected businessman versus a runaway wife." Horace's mouth twisted in a bloody smile. "I'll have her declared insane. There are asylums for disobedient wives, you know." Constance, struggling to her feet, felt cold fear at his words. Such things happened. She had heard whispered stories of inconvenient wives locked away on their husband's testimony alone. "You're forgetting something important," came a new voice from the edge of the clearing. Maddie Fletcher stood there, rifle in hand, alongside Sam and the town marshal from Silverpine. Behind them waited several more townspeople on horseback. "And what might that be?" Horace demanded. "Witnesses," Maddie replied calmly. "We all just watched you try to strangle and beat a woman half your size. Won't play well in court, Mr. Willingham." The marshal stepped forward. "I'd advise you to stand down, sir. You're already facing charges of assault." Horace's face contorted with disbelief. "You'd take the word of these frontier rabble over mine. Do you have any idea who I am?" "A man who beats women," Bryce stated flatly. "Nothing more." For a moment, it seemed Horace might charge at Bryce despite the revolver trained on him. Then, abruptly, the fight went out of him. His shoulders slumped as he seemed to recognize the futility of his position. "This isn't over," he muttered, glaring at Constance. "No court will grant you divorce without cause." "I'd say attempted murder provides ample cause," the marshal observed dryly. "Now you'll be coming with me back to Silverpine to answer some questions." As the marshal and Sam escorted a subdued Horace away, Bryce rushed to Constance, his face tight with concern. "Are you all right? I came as soon as I could." She nodded, though her throat burned and her jaw throbbed painfully. "How did you know?" Maddie heard rumors that Willingham had been asking about remote cabins in the hills. "We rode out immediately." His fingers gently traced the bruises forming on her neck. "I should never have left you alone." "You couldn't have known," she whispered, leaning into his strength. Maddie approached, her practical manner tempered by genuine concern. "Those bruises need tending," she observed. "And you both need to hear what's happened in town." She gestured toward the cabin. "Shall we go inside?" This has been quite enough drama for one day. Over coffee in the small cabin, Maddie explained how events had unfolded in Silverpine. Horace had arrived 3 days prior, initially presenting himself as a concerned husband searching for his confused, unwell wife. But his imperious manner and liberal distribution of bribes had raised suspicions. "He made a mistake when he tried to bribe the wrong person," Maddie explained with satisfaction. "Young Billy at the livery, Sam's nephew, came straight to me when Willingham offered him money for information about you two. That's when we started watching him," Sam added. "Noticed he was asking particular questions about remote cabins in the hills. Didn't take much to figure out what he was planning." The final piece fell into place when this arrived yesterday, Maddie continued, producing a folded document from her pocket. From a lawyer in Cheyenne, responding to inquiries I made about your situation, Constance. The letter, written in formal legal language, confirmed what Bryce had suggested earlier, that documented abuse provided grounds for divorce in Wyoming territory, particularly given the progressive laws regarding women's rights that were being established in the region. Wyoming's different from back east, Maddie explained. Women can own property here, conduct business independently, and the courts take a dim view of men who mistreat their wives. She smiled slightly. Being on the frontier has its advantages sometimes. Hope expanded in Constance's chest. You mean I could actually be free of him? Legally free? It won't be simple, Maddie cautioned. He'll fight it, claim you abandoned the marriage without cause, but with witnesses to his violence today, and if we can find others who suspected or knew about his treatment of you before. His housekeeper, Constance said suddenly. Martha Gaines, she saw everything, tended my injuries when he... She couldn't finish the sentence, but Bryce's hand found hers, offering silent support. Maddie nodded decisively. I'll send a letter to this Martha. If she's willing to provide testimony. She let the implication hang in the air. For the first time since fleeing Horace's house, Constance allowed herself to believe in the possibility of true freedom, not just escape, but legal, recognized independence. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Horace was held in the Silver Pine jail while awaiting trial for assault, his influence in the territorial capital insufficient to overcome the multiple witnesses to his attack on Constance. Meanwhile, with Maddie's assistance, Constance filed formal divorce proceedings, citing cruelty and attempted harm. To everyone's surprise, Martha Gaines arrived in Silver Pine a week after receiving Maddie's letter, bringing with her a detailed account of the injuries she had treated over the course of Constance's marriage. Her testimony, combined with the evidence of the attack at the cabin, created a compelling case that even Horace's expensive lawyers from Cheyenne couldn't easily dismiss. Throughout this tumultuous period, Bryce remained steadfastly at Constance's side. He attended every hearing, his quiet presence a source of strength when memories threatened to overwhelm her. At night, in the small room above Maddie's hotel that had become her temporary home, he held her through nightmares, his gentle touch gradually replacing fear with trust. Their relationship deepened gradually, built on mutual respect and understanding rather than desperate passion. Bryce never pushed for more than Constance was ready to give, seeming to understand instinctively that she needed time to heal from the wounds of her marriage. 3 months after the confrontation at the cabin, the territorial court rendered its verdict. Constance was granted complete divorce from Horace Willingham on grounds of extreme cruelty, with the right to reclaim her maiden name and to retain the small amount of personal property she had brought to the marriage. Horace, meanwhile, was sentenced to 6 months in the territorial prison for assault, a lenient sentence given the severity of his actions, but still a shocking fall from grace for a man of his standing. More damaging to him than the prison term was the public disgrace newspapers as far as Denver carried accounts of the case, describing in detail his violence toward his wife. On the day the divorce became final, Constance stood on the boardwalk outside the courthouse in Cheyenne, breathing deeply of air that seemed somehow fresher now that she was truly free. Bryce waited nearby, giving her space to absorb the moment. How does it feel? He asked when she finally turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Like being born again, she answered honestly. Frightening and wonderful all at once. They walked slowly through the bustling streets of the territorial capital, arm in arm without concern for appearances. At a small park overlooking the railroad station, they sat on a bench, watching travelers come and go. What will you do now? Bryce asked, the question he had carefully avoided during the long legal proceedings. Constance considered carefully before answering. Maddie has offered me partnership in the hotel, said I have a good head for business. She smiled slightly. It's tempting to have a place of my own, work that matters. Bryce nodded, his expression carefully neutral. Silver Pine's growing, the hotel will prosper with you helping to run it. And you, she asked, studying his face. Will you go back to the trail, trading horses across the territory? He looked out over the city, his profile strong against the afternoon light. Been thinking about that. He turned to meet her gaze directly. Sam's offered to sell me part interest in the livery. Says he's getting too old to manage alone, needs a partner with knowledge of horses. Hope quickened in Constance's chest. You'd stay in Silver Pine? If I had reason to, he replied, his meaning clear in his steady gaze. Constance took a deep breath, gathering courage for the words she had been considering for weeks. I've learned something important through all this, Bryce. Freedom doesn't mean being alone, it means choosing who to share your life with. She reached for his hand. And I choose you if you'll have me. The smile that transformed his face made her heart race. I've been waiting to hear those words since that night in the cabin, he admitted, gathering her hands in his. Didn't want to rush you, wanted you to be sure. I'm sure, she whispered. More sure than I've ever been of anything. He brushed a gentle kiss across her knuckles. I should do this properly, he said, sliding from the bench to one knee before her. Constance Abernathy, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not to possess or control, but to build a life together as equals. Tears of joy spilled over as she nodded. Yes, she managed through the emotion clogging her throat. Yes, I will. Their wedding took place the following spring in Silver Pine's small church, with Maddie as Constance's attendant and Sam standing up for Bryce. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed, recognizing in their union a story of redemption and second chances that resonated in a land where most had come seeking exactly that. With Constance's business acumen and Bryce's knowledge of horses, both the hotel and livery flourished. They built a small house on the edge of town, close enough for convenience, but with views of the open country that Bryce would always love. In time, children came, first a daughter with Bryce's blue eyes and Constance's determined spirit, then twin boys who grew to share their father's affinity for horses and their mother's intelligence. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Bryce surprised Constance with a special gift, the deed to the Line shack and surrounding acres where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. They rode out alone to visit it, finding the small cabin much as they had left it years before. As sunset painted the landscape in gold and shadow, they stood together outside the cabin, Bryce's arms encircling Constance from behind. Happy? He asked, his breath warm against her ear. She leaned back into his embrace, contentment filling her completely. More than I ever dreamed possible. Turning in his arms, she looked up at the face that had become as necessary to her as air, the lines at his eyes deeper now. Silver threading more prominently through his beard, but his gaze still clear and true. You know, she said thoughtfully, when I ran from Horace that night, I thought I was running away from something. I never imagined I was actually running toward everything I truly needed. Bryce smiled, drawing her closer. And now, he asked, his voice tender. Any regrets about where that path led you? Only one, she replied, her eyes twinkling. That I didn't find you sooner. He bent to kiss her, the gesture as reverent as their first kiss in this very spot. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice dropping to a whisper meant for her alone. You'll never run again, he promised, echoing words he had spoken years before when they'd faced down Horace together. Not from fear, not from pain. Whatever comes, we face it together. As darkness settled around them and the first stars appeared in the vastness above, Constance knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just safety, but true belonging. In Bryce's love, in the family they had created, in the community that had embraced them both, she had discovered what freedom really meant, not the absence of connection, but the presence of the right ones. They returned to the cabin hand in hand. Two people who had endured their separate wildernesses before finding in each other the courage to believe in love again. And in that simple shelter where their journey together had truly begun, they renewed their commitment to the path they had chosen, not always easy, but infinitely worthwhile. The lamp they lit cast golden light through the small window, a beacon of warmth against the gathering night. Inside, whispered words of love and gentle laughter spoke of promises kept and dreams fulfilled, proof that even in the wild uncertainty of frontier life, hearts could find their way home.